Chapter 1. The Impossible Crime. It was in the early days of November, the air crisp and the city veiled in a cold mist, when I, Dr. John H. Watson, was stirred from my writing by an urgent knock upon the door of our shared quarters at 221B Baker Street. Holmes, who had been reclining with eyes closed and fingers steepled across his chest, opened one eye at the sound. "Expecting anyone, Watson?" he murmured. Before I could answer, Mrs. Hudson appeared, breathless and pale. "Gentlemen, there's a man downstairs, an inspector from Scotland Yard. Says it's an emergency." Holmes was on his feet instantly. "Show him in." Inspector Tobias Granger entered, his dark overcoat still glistening with rain, and his expression bearing the strain of someone who had just glimpsed something that defied explanation. "I wouldn't trouble you, Mr. Holmes, unless it were beyond our scope. And I dare say this one is odd." He handed Holmes a folded sheet of police blotter notes. Holmes scanned the paper, eyes sharpening. "A death in Belgravia. A young woman was found in her bed. Appears to be sleeping. No sign of violence. No trace of poison or trauma. Yet the maid claims the pillow beneath her head had a pulse." "Yes," Granger said, lowering his voice. "A steady rhythmic beat. Like a second heartbeat." She screamed and fainted. When the butler arrived and removed the pillow, it was just that. A pillow. No hidden mechanism, no tricky. But the girl was dead all the same. Holmes said nothing for a long moment, then turned to me with a glint in his eye that I had come to recognize as the flicker of obsession. "Get your coat, Watson." Belgravia, with its stately mansions and frosted iron gates, was silent when we arrived, save for the soft scuff of our boots on the pavement. A pale light shimmered through the curtains of number 44 Harrington Row. Inside, the drawing room was heavy with silence, and a fire smoldered low in the grate. Lady Evelina Hargrave, barely 22, had been found dead in her bed that morning, her skin cold, her expression serene, as though she had simply drifted away in sleep. She had been the only daughter of the retired ambassador to Denmark, Lord Henry Hargrave, a man of considerable reputation and even more considerable pride. "We had no enemies," Lord Hargrave insisted, wringing his hands. "No scandal. No debts. Evelina was loved by all. This nonsense about a pulsing pillow, it's hysteria." Holmes inclined his head slightly, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. "May I see the room?" The bedroom was immaculate, preserved as it had been found. The sheets were unruffled. A book lay open on the nightstand. The fireplace was cold. Holmes stood for nearly 10 minutes in silence, gazing at the bed, the chair beside it, the rug, the window. He picked up the pillow and turned it over. It was a heavy feather-stuffed cushion, fine Egyptian cotton, no markings save for a small embroidered H in the corner. "There," said Inspector Granger, pointing. "That's the one." Holmes turned it in his hands again. "No wires. No, wait. No signs of pressure. Watson, feel it." I did. It was just a pillow. Ordinary. Soft. Holmes held it against the side of his own head for a moment. Then he frowned. "Faint. Almost imperceptible. But there is a rhythm. Not audible. Tactile. Like the echo of a breath." We both glanced at the body, still laid out on the bed, untouched. "She has no injuries," I said, kneeling beside her. "No fever. No convulsions. If she died of natural causes, it would be rare for a woman of her age and condition. But nothing about this feels natural." Holmes nodded. "Indeed. Inspector, I will need a full list of the household. Servants, visitors in the last week, tradesmen. Also, the names of any recent guests and staff who may have left in the past month." "Done." As Granger stepped away, Holmes crouched beside the hearth. He touched the iron grate, then traced something in the dust with his finger. "Watson, do you see it?" He leaned over. A faint outline. Circular. Roughly the size of a locket. Or the base of a candle holder. He straightened. There was something here. Recently removed. Note the outline is cleaner than the surrounding ash. Something warm stood here long enough to burn away dust, but not long enough to leave soot. "But what does that have to do with the pillow?" I asked. He turned to me with a peculiar smile. "Everything." As we left the room, Holmes paused at the door. "This is no simple case of death and sleep, Watson," he said softly. "There's something unnatural in that chamber. Something calculated. We must tread carefully, for whoever placed that pulsing pillow intended not only to kill but to bewilder." And with that we stepped once more into the fog. Chapter 2. Holmes and Watson's First Discussion. Back at Baker Street, the fog still clung to the windows like a veil of secrets, and the fireplace crackled with reluctant warmth. Holmes stood before the fire with his arms behind his back, staring into the flames as though the flickering embers might provide the final shape to an idea still forming. I settled into my chair opposite him, notebook in hand, heart still unsettled from the strange encounter in Belgravia. The girl's face haunted me, peaceful yes but too peaceful. As though arranged, composed, a portrait rather than a corpse. Holmes had removed his coat but refused the offer of tea. His mind, I could tell, was elsewhere. "You noticed the pillow?" I ventured after a long silence. "Yes," he replied, still staring into the fire. "But more importantly, I noticed what wasn't there." He turned and began to pace. "An elegant young woman of some standing dies in her sleep, leaving no sign of struggle or illness. The body is undisturbed. The surroundings are pristine. And yet, beneath her head, a pillow with a heartbeat." He stopped. "You felt it, Watson." "As did I. A vibration, faint but unmistakable. A trick of the nerves, perhaps? The maid may have panicked. Our own senses still suggestible." "No, Watson," Holmes interrupted sharply. "You are usually more cautious in dismissing the improbable." I flushed, chastened, and set down my pen. Holmes resumed his pacing. "3 details concern me most. First, the absence of struggle. Second, the rhythmic sensation in the pillow. And third, most curious of all, the outline in the hearth. Something warm had rested there for a precise interval. The pattern suggests a base with sloping edges, perhaps brass or copper. An object removed before the police arrived. You suspect the pillow and that object are connected?" "Ido." Holmes suddenly strode to his desk and opened a drawer. From within he pulled a small, worn notebook, the sort he only consulted in rare cases. "I keep a record of anomalies. Objects or techniques observed in prior investigations that had no immediate explanation, but which bore the mark of human ingenuity or cruelty. There was something I came across 5 years ago in Prague. A traveling hypnotist. A stage magician who had been accused of causing a man's collapse during a demonstration involving vibrations, sound, and suggestion." He flipped through the pages rapidly, then stopped. "Here," he murmured. "Benedek's cushion. A hollow cushion filled with coiled wires and a mechanism that emitted a low-frequency pulse, designed to influence a sleeper's mind, planting sensations or even hallucinations." "Surely that's superstition," I said, though not as confidently as I hoped. "Possibly. But Benedek's device was based on real principles. Controlled vibration, Watson, can affect the nervous system. Even the heart. Combine that with drugs, odorless, tasteless, administered slowly, and the effect can be lethal." "But how?" "There was no scent in the room. No residuo. Which is why we must consider what was there, however briefly." He crossed to the bookshelf and pulled out a slim volume on chemistry, flipping to a dog-eared page. "Certain compounds, when heated, release fumes that dissipate quickly but have profound effects on respiration or heart rate. If someone placed such a compound in a heated object, say a false candlestick, and allowed it to emit over several hours while the victim slept, the result could resemble natural death." He closed the book with a snap. "It would require planning, access to her chamber, familiarity with her schedule, and a motive worth such elaborate cruelty. And the pulsing pillow? Either a side effect, or the mechanism itself. I suspect it was never meant to be discovered. But whoever designed this made one miscalculation: human instinct. The maid reacted not to logic but to something primal. The sense that a thing beneath her mistress's head was alive." I sat back in my chair, absorbing the theory. "So, you believe the murder weapon was not a weapon at all, but a mechanism hidden in plain sight?" "Precisely." Another silence stretched between us, broken only by the hiss of the fire. At last Holmes said, "We must return tomorrow." Quietly. "Tonight the household is too alert. But once the morning begins in earnest, routine returns. People stop looking at every door." "And in the meantime?" Holmes opened a fresh sheet of paper and began scribbling names. "We begin with the people. Lord Hargrave. The maid. The butler. The former governess. Her music tutor. All mentioned in passing today. I want their histories, their connections. And Watson, any deaths or disappearances in the Hargrave household in the past 2 years. Even for pets. Pets. The pulse, Watson. If someone tested this mechanism before, they may have done so on something expendable. A bird. A cat. A small life overlooked, but evidence nonetheless." He paused and looked up, a dark gleam in his eye. "This is not an act of madness. It is a demonstration. And those, Watson, are meant to impress. As I watched him return to his scrawled notes and diagrams, a strange chill passed through me, colder than the fog outside. Not from fear, but from the realization that we had entered a game already in progress, one in which the first move had been silent, elegant, and fatal. Chapter 3, A Scene of Deception. We returned to Harrington Row the next morning, beneath a sky the color of soot and a drizzle that smeared the windows like tears. The great house was quieter now, more muted. The signs of morning had begun to set in. Dark crepe hung from the brass knocker. Black ribbons trailed along the wrought iron gate. Holmes, in his long overcoat and scarf, looked no less severe than the weather. He had not spoken much on our cab ride, save for a single murmured phrase, "We must listen to the silences, Watson. They lie less than people do." Inside, the butler, a thin hawk-nosed man named Collis, greeted us with solemn civility. He led us back to the late Lady Evelina's room without resistance. It had remained untouched since our last visit, per Holmes' request. As Holmes stepped through the threshold, he paused and tilted his head. "Do you hear it, Watson?" I strained my ears. "Only the rain." "Precisely. No one is near." "Good." He moved first to the hearth, crouching low. The outline is still visible, though slightly smudged now. Someone's attempted to clean without drawing attention. He took out his lens and examined the bricks closely. There's a residue, fine grayish. And a scent, barely traceable. He sniffed, then passed the lens to me. "What do you see?" I knelt and looked. A faint film dusted the edge of the hearth's brickwork. "Some kind of powder?" I said. Holmes nodded. "Likely derived from aconite or perhaps digitalis, chemicals that can affect heart rhythms, especially in vaporized form." He rose and turned to the bed, where the pillow still lay as we had found it, fluffed, clean, deceptively ordinary. Holmes did not touch it at once. Instead, he stood over the bed and looked up. "There." I followed his gaze to the ceiling. Just above the headboard, almost invisible against the plaster, was a hair-thin slit, barely noticeable except in the shifting daylight. "A servant's access panel," Holmes murmured. "Used long ago in these houses for lighting gas lamps or adjusting chandeliers from above. Likely forgotten by most." He pulled out a collapsible rod from his coat, an odd contraption he'd once used to retrieve a pistol from behind a bookcase, and extended it upward. With a deft motion, he pressed the rod into the slit. Click. A square panel fell slightly open. Holmes caught it and pulled it down. Dust rained onto the carpet. Inside, embedded in the wood, was a strange mechanism. A copper plate no larger than a tea saucer, with what looked like fine wiring wrapped in cloth and a discolored section along one side. "Good Lord," I said. "That's not old gas work." "No," Holmes agreed, his voice tight with interest. "It's modern. And deliberate. It was placed here with care, designed to rest directly over Evelina's head." He reached up with a gloved hand and unscrewed the small device, lowering it gently. "The discoloration suggests heat. It was used recently." We both stared at the object in his hands. It resembled nothing I had seen before, part machine, part trap. "What do you suppose it did?" Holmes raised a brow. "I don't suppose," I observed. "It emitted a low-frequency vibration, likely pulsed. Perhaps it synchronized with the pillow, or more accurately, with something inside the pillow." He turned to the cushion, then made an odd request. "Watson, please hand me my penknife." I did so. With surgical precision, Holmes made a small incision along the seam of the pillow. Feather down puffed out softly like snow. But then, he paused and with a gloved hand withdrew a thin black cord, coiled and frayed at the end. It was embedded within the stuffing. "A wire?" I whispered. Holmes nodded. "And not an electrical one. This appears to be part of a simple resonance system. The coil would have been stimulated by the sealing mechanism, causing the rhythmic pulse the maid felt. Crude but effective. But to what end? To confuse. To disturb. Perhaps even to sedate, if paired with the right chemical influence. But above all, to distract." He stepped back from the bed, surveying the entire room now with new eyes. "This entire chamber is a mask. The elegance, the peace, the untouched surfaces, each designed to mislead. Yet within them, a device from above, a wire within the very thing that supported her head, and a hearth that once held a vessel emitting deadly vapors." A knock at the door startled us both. Collis stood outside, holding an envelope. "This arrived by special courier, sir. Addressed to you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes accepted it carefully, examined the handwriting, then opened it. Inside was a single folded page. No signature. Just a typed message. "You're clever, Mr. Holmes." but not clever enough. She deserved it. As you will discover soon enough. He held it up for me to see. Typed, he said. No watermark. Common paper. No postmark, hand-delivered. And the courier? Anonymous, said Collis. Paid in coin, not notes. Described the sender only as a gentleman in a hat. Holmes turned to me. This is no longer a simple case of death by invention, Watson. This is a performance. Someone is watching. He tucked the note away. And if I'm correct, they've left other messages. Subtler ones. Left in rooms, in reactions, in absences. We must read the house like a page of Greek. Come, Watson. I wish to interview the staff, each of them. Especially the ones who say the least. As we stepped out into the hall once more, the fog outside had thickened into something nearly solid. And with every step deeper into the house, I felt more certain of one thing. Evelina Hargrave had not died in isolation. She had died as the first line in a script written by an unseen hand. One we had only just begun to decipher. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Suspects. The Hargrave estate was not so much a household as a miniature society, self-contained, highly stratified, and, as Holmes would later remark, rife with quiet deceit. By mid-morning, Inspector Granger had returned to assist in interviewing the staff, though his presence was more procedural than strategic. Holmes had taken command of the inquiry with the natural authority of a man who saw the truth as something to be excavated, not declared. We began in the library, a high-ceilinged chamber draped in velvet and lined with dusty volumes. One by one, the members of the household were brought in. Holmes insisted on speaking to them without the presence of Lord Hargrave, claiming, correctly, that rank had a way of muddying honesty. The first to enter was Mr. Collis, the butler. He stood with a soldier's stillness, his gaunt face unreadable. "You've been with the Hargraves long?" Holmes asked without looking up from his notes. 23 years, sir." "Have you observed any change in Lady Evelina's behavior in recent months?" Collis hesitated. Only that she had become reserved. She declined more social invitations. Spent more time in her chamber. Was she unwell? "No, sir. She said she preferred her solitude." Holmes tapped his fingers on the armrest. "And did she receive visitors?" "Only one regularly, a Mr. Benedict Viner, her music tutor. He visited twice weekly." I saw Holmes register the name with faint interest. "Did you admit him each time?" "Yes, sir." "And what of her previous governess?" "I believe she left recently. Miss Danton. She was dismissed 3 months ago." No explanation given. Lady Hargrave handled it quietly. Holmes nodded once and the butler was dismissed. Next came Edith, the young maid who had discovered the body. Her eyes were still red-rimmed, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. "Tell me," Holmes began gently, "what exactly did you feel when you touched the pillow?" Edith trembled. It was like touching a chest. A person's chest. It was soft but something beat under it. Just for a moment. I thought it were alive." "Had you noticed anything odd about the lady's room before that morning? Any smells? Strange noises?" She shook her head. "No, sir. It was always quiet. Sometimes there was a soft humming. I thought it was in my ears. The kind you get when you've been working too hard." Holmes shared a glance with me, confirmation of subtle vibration. "Did Lady Evelina seem afraid of anything?" "She kept her door locked at night, which was new. And she stopped playing the piano, though she used to love it. Said the sound made her head ache." Holmes scribbled something quickly, then dismissed her. Then came Mr. Benedict Viner, the music tutor. A pale, delicate man in his early 30s, he carried himself with an air of cultivated sorrow. He wore black, not for Evelina but as part of his fashion. "She was gifted," Viner said wistfully. "Though in recent weeks she barely touched the keys. Claimed the vibrations unsettled her." "Vibrations," Holmes repeated. Viner waved a hand. "Her word, not mine. She said the piano made her feel as though her bones were rattling. I assumed it was nerves." "Were you close to her?" Viner smiled faintly. "We were sympathetic souls." "Romantically?" He flinched but recovered. "Not overtly. There was affection. But it remained proper." "Did she confide in you?" "She mentioned dreams. Recurring ones. Strange images. A room that breathed. A whispering sound in her ears when she tried to sleep." Holmes looked up sharply. "Did she describe the sound?" Viner hesitated. "Like a low thrum. Constant, like the hum of a hive." He was dismissed after a few more questions. When the door closed behind him, Holmes turned to me. "Note, Watson. Every witness has confirmed either the vibration or a symptom related to it. But none recognized it as external. Meaning? I asked. Meaning whoever designed this wanted the experience to feel internal, madness, not murder. We were just about to take a break when the final figure entered. Miss Beatrice Danton, the former governess. She had arrived unexpectedly, requesting to speak with Holmes directly. Though dismissed months ago, she still wore a stern expression, and her gray dress gave her the appearance of a woman born to shadows. I wasn't called back by Lord Hargrave, she said coolly. I came of my own accord. I heard of Evelina's death. I believe it was not natural. Holmes' eyes lit with interest. Go on. She was being manipulated. I don't know by whom. But there was someone in the house, someone new, who frightened her. A friend of Lord Hargrave's, I believe. Visited often during the summer. Evelina would leave the room when he entered. Name? I was never told it, but I saw him twice. Tall, dark coat, gloves even in warm weather. Spoke very little. Only to Lord Hargrave. Holmes leaned forward. Why were you dismissed, Miss Danton? She straightened. Because I asked too many questions. He smiled faintly. Good. You've come to the right place. Once the last of them had gone, Holmes leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. A confined household. A methodical killing. A curious mechanism. And now, the hint of an outside force. The web begins to take shape, Watson. And the suspects? I asked. Holmes closed his eyes. Each one carries a thread. But only one knows where it leads. Chapter 5. The Red Herring. Scotland Yard was swift to act once a name with even the faintest odor of guilt reached their ears. By the following morning, the newspapers already speculated that Mr. Benedict Viner, the sensitive and shadowy music tutor, had been questioned in connection with Lady Evelina's death. Tragic attachment leads to tragedy? Read one headline. Another, more brazen, murder in a minor key. Inspector Granger summoned us to the yard that same afternoon. Viner had been brought in, politely yes but under pressure, and was now being held in an interview room with more iron than elegance. Granger met us in the hallway, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. We've got enough to hold him overnight at least, he said, lowering his voice. The man's evasive. Talks in riddles. He can't account for where he was between 10 and midnight on the night of the girl's death. Holmes raised an eyebrow. And has he confessed to constructing copper vibration mechanisms in secret sealing compartments? Granger bristled. No, but look here, Holmes. The girl was nervous around him. The staff saw them arguing the week before her death. And he admitted to tampering with her piano, altering the tension in the strings to change the tone. Seems the fellow likes vibrations. Holmes chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Yes, Inspector, but so do violinists and bridge engineers. That hardly makes them murderers. Still, Granger insisted, he fits the type, brooding, obsessed, eccentric. As do I, Holmes said mildly. Shall we speak to him? Granger led us to the viewing room. Through the frosted glass, Viner sat at the table, hands folded, face pale but calm. His hat and gloves had been removed. His long fingers tapped absently on the tabletop in a slow rhythm, as if hearing music no one else could. Holmes entered without preamble. Viner looked up. Have you come to finish the composition, Mr. Holmes? Or to rewrite it altogether? Holmes Saturday neither. I simply wish to determine if you're playing the right piece. Viner's lips twitched faintly, but his eyes were tired. I didn't kill her. That remains to be seen. Let us begin with your relationship. You were infatuated with Evelina Hargrave. I admired her. I was fond of her. But I was not obsessed. And yet, you tuned her piano to cause deeper resonance than was required. Why? Viner looked away. She said it soothed her. That it matched a tone she heard when alone. I tried to recreate it, to understand what disturbed her. She confided her dreams to you. Yes. Dreams of breath beneath the bed. Of walls that pulsed. Of a pillow that watched her. Holmes tilted his head. Old imagery. Did you suggest these to her? Implant the idea of such things? Viner's voice hardened. No. I only listened. I loved her in the only way she allowed. She was terrified, Mr. Holmes, of something. But not of me. Holmes leaned forward. Tell me about the man Miss Danton saw, the one who visited Lord Hargrave during the summer. Viner hesitated. I saw him once. Always wore gloves. Called himself Mr. Rowan, I believe. Something about him felt staged. Like an actor playing his role too well. Did Evelina speak of him? She asked me once if I believed people could be followed by ghosts while still alive. Holmes said nothing for a moment. Then he stood. You may be odd, Mr. Viner, and even reckless in your affections. But you are no killer. At worst, you were her echo, not her end. He left the room, leaving Granger sputtering behind him. As we emerged into the cold twilight, Holmes lit a cigarette and blew a long stream of smoke into the fog. A red herring, Watson. Viner was meant to be suspected. The tailoring of suspicion is often more intricate than the crime itself. You believe he's innocent then? Ido. He lacks the detachment required for this crime. The killer is a planner. A scientist of sorts. Viner is a romantic. We walked in silence until Holmes suddenly halted and turned to me. Do you recall the phrase in the letter? She deserved it. As you will discover soon enough. That's not a spontaneous threat, it's a layered challenge. I nodded slowly. Meaning the killer wants us to keep digging. Precisely. He, or she, has left us clues not because they were careless but because they are confident. Which means the next piece of the puzzle will not be found in evidence, but in pattern. Pattern? I asked. Holmes smiled. Yes, Watson. What do a locked bedroom, a pulsing pillow, a sealing device, and a vaporized toxin have in common? I frowned. They're all silent, subtle, internalized. Correct. All the methods rely on sensory manipulation. The victim experiences the attack as a sensation, not an act. There is no struggle because there appears to be nothing to struggle against. Which implies, I said slowly, the killer is not simply a murderer. They're a kind of performer. Holmes exhaled. Indeed. One with a flair for psychological theater. He flicked away his cigarette and adjusted his coat collar. We'll return to the Hargrave house tomorrow. I want to speak with Lady Hargrave herself. She's remained entirely too quiet, and in a house this theatrical, silence is rarely honest. Chapter 6. Shadows Beneath the Ashes. The village of Fauquensey had returned to its stillness by the next morning, though the tension in the air was as thick as the mist that clung stubbornly to the ground. Hercule Poirot stood by the broken fountain in the central square, his eyes fixed on the charred remains of the von Kramer manor that loomed beyond the trees. The scent of smoke still lingered faintly, mixing with the sweet aroma of old roses from the nearby garden. Somewhere beneath those ashes, he knew, lay truths yet unspoken. Dr. Elsa Roth met him near the garden gate, her gloved hands trembling despite the mild weather. She had been attending to the townspeople, many of whom were still in shock after the fire and the second death. The tailor, Henning, had been buried quietly at dawn, the villagers too afraid to speak openly of his supposed suicide. But Poirot did not believe in convenient deaths. You wish to see the ledger from the pharmacy? She asked, her voice soft and uncertain. Merci, yes, Poirot nodded, accepting the leather-bound book. He flipped it open with care, scanning pages filled with dated orders and prescriptions in Elsa's tidy handwriting. He stopped at a page from 5 weeks ago. This entry here, arsenical compounds delivered in bulk. A rare request these days, non? He asked, tapping the line. Elsa hesitated. For fumigation, she said. The manor cellar's rats. I delivered it myself to the housekeeper, Greta. Poirot looked up sharply. To Greta. Not to Captain von Kramer? No, Elsa said. He never dealt with such matters. Greta was in charge of the household supplies. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet Greta is now in the morgue. Another thread cut before it could unravel. They walked toward the ruins together. Firemen had combed the site already, and the manor now stood a blackened skeleton. Only the west wing remained partially intact. Poirot moved purposefully toward it, drawn to the study where he and Captain von Kramer had last spoken. Inside, ash blanketed everything like snowfall. A large portrait of the late Baroness lay face down on the scorched floor. Poirot lifted it gently, revealing a hidden panel in the wall behind. A narrow cupboard, charred but still intact, held several books, ledgers, journals, and beneath them a rusted tin box. Poirot pried it open. Inside were letters. Handwritten, sealed with a wax stamp bearing a stag's head. Elsa leaned closer. That's the von Kramer crest. Oui, Poirot murmured, examining the date. And this is dated 1917. From the front lines. He read aloud, My beloved Lotte, should this letter reach you, know that the horrors I have witnessed will never fade. I did what I must. For the family, for the name. For secrets that must never reach Berlin. Poirot frowned. There is more, many letters all addressed to Lotte. But no replies. And this seal, identical to one I saw on a locket Greta wore. Elsa's eyes widened. The housekeeper? But she wasn't family. She was something more, Poirot said. Perhaps the last living link to whatever occurred in 1917. He folded the letters and tucked them into his coat. I must speak to Fräulein Liesel again. Back at the village inn, Liesel von Kramer was seated by the hearth, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were rimmed red, but the moment she saw Poirot enter, her posture stiffened. I've told you everything, she said. There is nothing more. Poirot took the seat opposite her. Mademoiselle lies are like smoke. They cloud the air, yes, but eventually they rise. The fire last night was not an accident. And I believe your brother was silenced because he was close to speaking the truth. Liesel flinched. You think I had a hand in that? No, Poirot said gently. But I believe you know who did. Or at the very least, what they were trying to hide. He placed one of the letters on the table. Your father wrote this. In 1917. And I believe these letters hold the key to the scandal Greta died to protect. Liesel stared at the envelope, her expression cracking like thin ice. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. I was just a child, she whispered. I didn't understand then. But Greta did. She was with my mother through the war, her closest friend. She knew everything. That's why she never left the house, not even after my mother died. She promised to protect us. Protect you from what? Liesel looked up, her face pale. My father was not a war hero, Monsieur Poirot. He was an executioner. In the final months of the war he was stationed at a camp, a place no one dares mention. He ordered things done. Unspeakable things. And Captain von Kramer? Poirot asked quietly. Liesel hesitated. He found the letters by accident when he inherited the manor. Greta begged him to destroy them, to leave the past buried. But he wouldn't. He said the truth had to be faced. Poirot leaned back. And someone else, someone in this village, did not agree. Liesel nodded slowly. Henning knew. He was a boy in the manor during the war. A servant's son. I think he saw things. Heard things. That's why he was always so strange. Poirot said nothing for a long moment, the fire crackling in the silence. Then softly, Mademoiselle, you are in danger. Whoever silenced your brother and Greta may not be finished. Her voice was barely audible. Then I suppose I have only one choice left. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And what is that? To tell you the whole truth, she whispered. All of it. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying ash and secrets across the fields. The truth lay heavy in the air, but for Poirot the fog was beginning to lift. Chapter 7. The letter beneath the floorboards. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a damp stillness that clung to the walls of Greywick Hall like the scent of rotting wood. The storm's fury had done little to disrupt the tension that hung over the house like an invisible noose. Blaise sat at the edge of the study fireplace, his fingertips still tingling from the dusty parchment he had found. An old letter, folded and crumbling, stuffed beneath a loose floorboard in the very corner where the Victrola once sat. He laid it out carefully on the desk, its ink faded, the paper browned by time. Maeve leaned in beside him, her breath shallow, as though she feared breathing too hard might destroy it. It's addressed to Charles Rowley, Blaise murmured, but it's unsigned. He read aloud. You fool. If you truly think the widow doesn't know, you've underestimated her cunning. What she saw in the parlor that night, what we both saw, was meant to be forgotten. You promised me silence, and now I hear whispers of guilt. I will not fall with you. If this goes any further, I'll be forced to act. Burn this. Maeve's hand flew to her mouth. So it wasn't just the widow who kept secrets. Blaise nodded slowly. Someone was blackmailing Rowley. Or perhaps warning him. And they both saw something in the parlor. Something incriminating. He tapped the corner of the letter. This wasn't written yesterday. The language, the ink, this could be years old. Maeve frowned. But Charles only died 2 months ago. Exactly. So whatever he was part of, it was lingering. Festering. Long enough for the past to catch up. Just then, the creak of floorboards from upstairs echoed down. Blaise rose. Cyril? But when he stepped into the corridor, he found it empty. No Cyril. No movement. Just the long hallway stretching toward the staircase. We're not alone, he said quietly. Maeve drew in a breath. The housekeeper? Or someone else who knows what this letter means. They returned to the study and carefully rewrapped the letter. Blaise tucked it into his coat pocket. Let's not leave this lying about. Whoever's watching may already know too much. They made their way back to the sitting room, where Cyril had promised to examine the safe behind the painting of the huntress. But the room was empty. The painting hung askew. The cabinet stood open. He was here, Blaze said. Where would he have gone? Blaze's gaze swept the room. Then he noticed something odd, a trail of faint, damp footprints leading from the hearth to the French doors that opened to the back garden. Maeve stepped closer. He left. Not alone, Blaze muttered. Those prints, there's a second set, smaller, lighter. Someone let him out. Blaze yanked open the door. The cold night air bit into his cheeks. Fog rolled across the garden, heavy and still. At the edge of the grounds, barely visible in the mist, was the greenhouse. Come on. They moved swiftly, careful not to slip on the wet stone path. The greenhouse door was ajar. Blaze pushed it open, and there, between rows of withered orchids and overturned pots, lay Cyril. Alive. But barely. He was bound at the wrists, a bruise darkening his temple. His eyes fluttered open as Blaze crouched beside him. Tried to warn me, Cyril rasped. Said I was digging too deep. Blaze's jaw tightened. Who? A woman. Not the widow. Someone else. I didn't see her face. But she knew my name, and yours. Maeve's hands trembled. What did she take? Cyril gave a weak laugh. Nothing. She didn't want the letter. She wanted me to stay quiet. Said if we keep looking, more bodies will turn up. Blaze helped him sit up. Then we're closer than I thought. He looked around the greenhouse. One of the tables had been overturned in a struggle. The glass panes above were streaked with soot, as though someone had tried to obscure the view. Maeve stepped closer to the orchid bed. Blaze, these plants, they're dead. All of them. As if someone poisoned the soil. Blaze's eyes narrowed. Someone didn't just lure Cyril here. They've been using this place. Watching from here. Maybe even planning from here. As they guided Cyril back into the house, Blaze's mind churned with a dozen connections, half-formed and dangerous. The anonymous letter. The parlor incident. The widow's silence. Now this attack. The threads were tightening and soon they would snap. Back in the study, Cyril drank water while Blaze re-examined the safe. It had clearly been tampered with before he got there, scratches on the lock as if someone had tried to break in days before. Blaze turned to Maeve. I want to know what happened in that parlor. What Rowley saw. What the widow witnessed but refused to speak of. You think she's still hiding it? Maeve asked. She may not have a choice. But someone else remembers. Someone who was willing to leave Cyril unconscious to keep us from learning it. He paused, then added, we need to get the widow alone. Tonight. Tonight. Maeve exhaled slowly, brushing back her hair. Then let's hope she's ready to talk. Because I'm not sure we'll get a second chance. Chapter 8, Beneath the Silver Veil. The rain had stopped, but a humid mist still clung to the cobbled streets of Brussels like a veil of forgotten secrets. Poirot stood under the awning of the antique bookstore on Rue de Minims, his gaze fixed on the narrow alley where Madame Leroux had vanished the previous evening. Hastings stood beside him, still shaken from their earlier encounter with the peculiar bookseller who had handed Poirot the letter wrapped in faded parchment. Are you certain it was her? Hastings asked, glancing toward the fog-laced alley. I am certain it was someone who wished to be seen as her, Poirot murmured, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate grey coat. But certainty is not evidence, mon ami. And in this case, illusion is a key player on the stage. They turned back into the shop, its walls lined with time-worn volumes, each smelling of damp pages and secrets. The bookseller, tall, pallid, and humming a disjointed tune, was now reorganizing a shelf with surgical precision. Poirot tapped the letter gently in his palm. This note claims to be from a woman who cannot be Madame Leroux because she is either dead or expertly hidden. Either way, Hastings, this is no longer a case of disappearance. It is a performance. What do you mean, Poirot? I mean, someone is writing a narrative for us, a trail of carefully placed clues meant to evoke curiosity, not clarity. This letter, the fake sighting, the name on the registry. All of it is staged. He moved toward the rear of the shop where a narrow staircase led downward, concealed behind a tapestry depicting the myth of Orpheus. The bookseller made no move to stop him. Downstairs was colder. The cellar walls were lined with crates and half-unpacked boxes, and a single lantern flickered on a hook above. In one corner sat a wooden cabinet sealed with brass latches. Poirot knelt and inspected the edges with a handkerchief. This was recently opened, he said softly. Dust is unsettled. Look, Hastings, see the imprint of fingers here? He lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of first editions, some worth a fortune. But tucked beneath them was a slim, leather-bound ledger. He flipped it open. Hastings leaned in. What is it? A shipping log, dates, book titles, destinations, and initials. These entries, see? CM, appears repeatedly next to several crates bound for Paris and Bruges. CM as in Camille Moreau? Hastings asked, frowning. Poirot's eyes glinted. Just so. And note this entry, Codex Flammius, recipient, L. That book is notorious, a forged occult manuscript. And oh, Louis Leroux. A silence fell between them as the pieces began to align. This is no simple case of a missing woman, Hastings murmured. No. It is a trafficking ring for dangerous, perhaps forbidden literature. Madame Leroux may have discovered it, perhaps she was involved or perhaps she tried to stop it. Either way, she's the thread they tried to cut. They ascended from the cellar quietly. The bookseller still offered no protest, only a faint smirk. Poirot tapped the counter lightly. Monsieur, your shop is quite the archive. I trust your inventory is registered with the city council. The smirk disappeared. I'm sure you'll find nothing illegal here, monsieur. Poirot nodded. I rarely find what I expect, monsieur. It's the unexpected I pursue. They stepped into the street. Poirot turned toward the Grand Place. We must go to the conservatoire. Camille Moreau is performing tonight. Her name appears too often in these shadows. Hastings hesitated. Do you think she's in danger? I think she is the most visible person in a very hidden game. And visibility, mon ami, is often fatal when the stage is rigged. The conservatoire loomed like a fortress of music and secrets. Inside, the concert had already begun. The auditorium shimmered with candlelight, and the audience was transfixed as Camille Moreau's bow danced across the strings of her violin, conjuring a mournful tune that seemed to echo from another time. Poirot leaned close to Hastings. Watch her, not the music. They did. Camille's expression was composed, but her fingers trembled slightly. A flicker of hesitation. A note held just too long. She was performing, yes, but she was afraid. At the close of her piece, the applause thundered. Camille bowed graciously, but Poirot had already moved to the side of the stage, intercepting her as she stepped behind the curtain. Mademoiselle Moreau, he said gently, I am Hercule Poirot. I believe you've been expecting me. She froze, her face pale as moonlight. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I believe you do. Madame Leroux was a patron of yours. You were the last to see her before she disappeared. Camille swallowed, eyes darting toward the hallway. She confided something to you? Poirot pressed. Something that frightened her. Camille glanced behind her, then stepped close. If you're right, then I'm next. Poirot's gaze was calm. No, mademoiselle. You are not next. You are bait. A door slammed somewhere in the wings. Camille flinched. Poirot's voice dropped. Whoever is orchestrating this believes you will lead them to what Madame Leroux hid. A ledger. A name. Or perhaps something far older. Older? Camille whispered. Yes. The books she was tracing were not merely rare, they were dangerous. Occult texts, maps to forgotten rituals. Someone is willing to kill to reclaim them. Madame Leroux vanished not to flee, but to shield. Camille's voice was faint. She told me, there is power in stories, Camille. But there is terror in the ones they try to erase. Poirot's brows drew close. Then we must recover the story before it too is lost. From the orchestra pit below, another note echoed, a violin out of tune. Poirot turned toward it sharply, then back to Camille. We leave. Now. As they disappeared into the corridors, shadows stirred behind the velvet curtain. And somewhere in the audience, a man with silver cufflinks and a crimson cravat adjusted his seat, watching their exit with a faint, knowing smile. Chapter 9. The Ink Beneath the Skin. The morning fog clung low over the rooftops of London like a stubborn ghost as Poirot and Inspector Japp made their way back to Sir Reginald Whitley's townhouse. Though the air was thick and quiet, Poirot's mind was crackling with theories, each more tangled than the last. Inside, the servants were bustling with subdued energy, trying to maintain the air of a functioning household. But the murder had fractured the Whitley home, and Poirot could feel the tremor in every glance, every step. Sir Reginald sat in the drawing room, a tumbler of whiskey clutched in his hand, though it was barely past 10. He looked tired, as if the years had caught up with him overnight. Sir Reginald, Poirot began softly, may we trouble you with one or two more questions? He gave a tired nod. At this point, Monsieur Poirot, I welcome anything that might make sense of this nightmare. Poirot sat opposite him, careful not to betray too much. Did your daughter ever show signs of unusual secrecy? A private correspondence? A confidant who was not a member of the family? Reginald considered this. Eleanor was independent, yes. Always writing in her journals, always off with her camera. But nothing I thought was suspicious. Except. Yes. Poirot leaned forward. There was one thing. A few weeks ago I noticed a letter, left open in the library. It had no return address. Just a few lines. The truth is inked beneath. Don't forget what was promised. It unsettled me. I asked her and she said it was a prank. I pressed no further. Poirot and Japp exchanged a glance. Japp folded his arms. Sounds like blackmail. Poirot did not respond. Instead he stood. Might I see Miss Whitley's personal effects again, Sir Reginald? Particularly any journals? They were soon led to Eleanor's study. The room was painted a soft green, filled with dried flowers, neatly stacked books and several black and white photographs on the wall. On the desk, a leather-bound journal caught Poirot's eye. He opened it and leafed through. Most of it was filled with melancholic musings and cryptic poetry. But near the back he found something odd, a passage inked not in her usual flowing hand but in a cramped, angular script. The initials remain even after silence. Beneath the skin truth sleeps. Beneath the skin lies bleed. Poirot narrowed his eyes, then turned to Japp. Mon ami, we must examine the body again. Japp frowned. What are you thinking? She was branded by something, or someone. Perhaps not in the sense of a mark, but a message. The phrase, beneath the skin, what if it's literal? Back at the mortuary, Dr. Forbes greeted them with a raised brow. Back again? You're persistent, Poirot. Poirot bowed. A final request. Could you examine Miss Whitley's body one more time? I am looking for a hidden tattoo or a scar, anything out of the ordinary on her back or torso. Dr. Forbes complied, carefully removing the sheet and examining the body with professional detachment. After a few minutes he paused. Curious, he murmured. There's a faint ink mark here, just under the left shoulder blade. It's almost completely faded. He handed Poirot a magnifying glass. Under closer inspection, a symbol emerged, a small triangle enclosing an eye. The Eye of Providence, Japp muttered. Freemasons. Or something more personal, Poirot replied. This is not Masonic in nature. It is symbolic, clandestine. Perhaps a mark of membership. For what? Poirot stood still, eyes closed for a moment. Let us revisit our assumptions. A secret lover, a mysterious letter, an inked message hidden beneath the skin, and a potential witness in Mary Green, who vanished after discovering something in Eleanor's room. They left the mortuary in silence, Poirot's footsteps quickening as they stepped back onto the fog-drenched streets. We must find Mary Green. She holds the thread, I am sure of it. Back at Scotland Yard, Japp barked orders. Within hours they had a lead. Mary had been spotted at her cousin's home in Whitechapel, clearly frightened and hiding. Poirot and Japp arrived by nightfall. The cousin answered the door with hesitation but eventually let them in. Mary was in a back room, pale and trembling, her fingers clutching a rosary. I didn't want to run, she whispered. But I didn't know who to trust. Poirot sat beside her gently. Mademoiselle, I assure you no harm will come to you. But you must tell us what you saw. Mary nodded. The night before Miss Eleanor died, she received a visitor. A man. I didn't see his face. But I heard them arguing, something about a book and something about a secret he said she was hiding. She told him to leave or she'd expose everything. Everything? Japp leaned forward. She said, you think I won't tell because I'm afraid. But I'm not afraid anymore. And then he left. I found one of his gloves the next morning in her writing drawer. Do you have it? Poirot asked. Mary reached into her satchel and pulled out a dark leather glove, monogrammed with gold letters. Êtes-vous? Poirot's gaze darkened. Reginald Whitley? No, Japp said slowly. Reginald William, but his brother, Rowan Whitley. The twin brother? Poirot whispered. Japp frowned. But he's been dead for years. Poirot's little gray cells tingled. Perhaps not. Or perhaps, not in the way we think. The room fell into a tense hush. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed. And in Poirot's mind, the shape of the truth was beginning to form, not yet clear but emerging from the shadows. Chapter 10. The Whisper Behind the Mirror. Blaise stood motionless, the cold silence of the library washing over him as Marlowe's phone fell silent in his hand. You'll regret digging, detective, the caller had hissed before disconnecting. The line echoed in his mind like a promise rather than a threat. Ava sat quietly on the armrest of a leather chair, her eyes locked on Blaise, searching his face for a reaction. Another anonymous voice? She asked gently. Blaise nodded. Same filtered tone. But this time they're reacting. That means we're close. Ava exhaled, the air sharp with unease. Do you think Marlowe is still alive? Blaze hesitated. I think someone wants us to believe he's either a ghost or buried under 6 feet of lies. Either way, we need something real. He walked to the far wall of the library where the towering bookshelves seemed more like barriers than resources. The place smelled of cedar and old secrets, and he trusted his instincts more than ever in this moment. There had to be more than just literary clutter behind Marlowe's last breadcrumb. Ava joined him, running her fingers along the spines. He said to look behind something. Not in something. That means he hid it in plain sight. Blaze's gaze caught on a large, decorative mirror that stretched nearly to the ceiling. Its gilded edges were coated in dust and its placement, facing only books, felt wrong. He stepped toward it slowly, and when he got close enough, he noticed a faint smudge of fingerprints near the bottom corner. Not visible at a glance, someone had touched it deliberately. He motioned to Ava. Help me lift it. Together they heaved the mirror slightly forward. A gust of stale air puffed out from behind it, and Blaze's pulse quickened. Behind the mirror was not a wall, but a shallow recess with a stack of thick, sealed envelopes and a single journal resting on top of them. Ava stared. Holy, he built a hiding place into the wall. Blaze pulled out the journal, blowing off years of dust, and carefully opened to the first page. Marlowe's handwriting stared back at them, tight, deliberate, and filled with anxious purpose. If someone is reading this, I failed to stay invisible. If you're Blaze, I trust you. If you're not, may this book curse your conscience like it cursed mine. What the hell did you get into, Marlowe? Blaze murmured. The pages inside told a story in fragments. Names were redacted in ink, but dates and descriptions of surveillance, bribes, and transactions were scrawled in detail. Some entries referenced late-night visits to the widow's address, alluding to secret meetings and envelopes exchanged in silence. One line stood out like fire. The widow's second account is the real vault. Not the one in her name, but the one she keeps under her dead husband's. That's where the insurance never really went. Blaze's brow furrowed. The money wasn't lost. It was moved. Hidden under the guise of the deceased. And she's been collecting pity while laundering it in plain sight, Ava whispered. Suddenly they heard footsteps. Slow, precise. Someone was in the hallway outside the library. Blaze quickly slid the journal back into the recess and repositioned the mirror just as the door creaked open. Elizabeth North stood there, clad in midnight blue silk, her expression composed but her eyes razor-sharp. Oh, she said softly, I didn't realize guests were still exploring the house. Blaze stepped forward, casual but alert. Couldn't sleep. Your father's taste in literature is consuming. Her smile was polite, too practiced. He always said this room had ears. He meant it figuratively, but sometimes I wonder. Blaze locked eyes with her. Did your father ever speak of a second vault? Perhaps one tied to a legal trust in your stepfather's name. Her pause was so subtle it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Blaze saw it. Her nostrils flared just slightly. I don't believe so, she said, her voice calm. But then there are many things he never told me. He liked puzzles. Even in grief. As she turned to leave, she added over her shoulder, I'd be careful reading too far into his secrets. Some truths aren't worth knowing. When the door clicked shut, Ava leaned close to Blaze. She knows. About the vault. About everything. Blaze nodded. And she knows we know. They exited the library quietly and made their way back to the main hallway. Blaze's thoughts churned. Elizabeth's tone hadn't been one of panic, it was warning. Subtle, restrained, and deliberate. Either she's covering for the widow, Ava said, or she is the one using the widow as a front. Blaze stopped walking. We need to verify that vault. Now. If the money never disappeared and it's sitting under a dead man's name, that's fraud. Massive fraud. And motive, Ava added. For silencing Marlowe, for threatening you, for lying to everyone. Blaze glanced at his watch. The hour was late, but urgency drowned fatigue. We'll go back to the city in the morning. I know someone who can pull financial records even the feds can't sniff. Before they returned to their rooms, Blaze took a final glance at the hallway mirror near the stairs. The same model as in the library. Decorative. Antique. And in that moment he noticed something else. A faint line of condensation, like breath, appearing on the mirror's lower edge. Then, slowly, a shape formed behind the glass. Not a reflection. A face. Watching. Then gone. He stared, frozen, heart thudding. Ava turned to ask something, but the look on his face made her stop cold. Blaze? He slowly turned toward her. There's someone else in this house. And they're not using the doors. Chapter 11. A Trail of Smoke and Strings. The scent of dust and dried herbs hung in the attic like a memory. Poirot stood at the threshold, eyes narrowed as he scanned the cluttered space above Margot's studio. It had taken only a quiet word with the landlord for them to gain access. And now here he was, stepping into the room where secrets breathed behind every pile of newspapers and moth-bitten fabric. Hastings followed close behind, ducking beneath a hanging beam. If you ask me, Poirot, this place looks like it hasn't seen a broom since the war. Non mon ami, but it has seen much else, Poirot murmured, glancing toward the makeshift desk in the far corner. Observe. A typewriter. A stack of letters. A pattern that perhaps has gone unnoticed by the good Inspector Forrester. They approached the desk. The machine was covered in a thin film of grime, but recent use was evident. A fresh ribbon, indentations on the platen, and a typed page still in the roller. Poirot leaned in, careful not to disturb anything. It's half a letter, Hastings observed, peering over his friend's shoulder. Doesn't even have a salutation. Poirot read aloud. You should never have left the second book where anyone could find it. I warned you what would happen if... And then nothing. The page ended mid-sentence as if the writer had been interrupted. Poirot gently extracted the sheet and held it to the light. Typed in haste, perhaps fear. The key to this case, Hastings, lies not in what was written, but in what was meant to be kept hidden. They rifled carefully through the other pages stacked on the desk. Most were innocuous, drafts of invoices, correspondence to art galleries. But then Hastings uncovered something different. A list, he said, passing it to Poirot. With names. Recognize any of them? Poirot's brow furrowed as he read. Jacqueline Marrow. Alfred Chalmas. Margot Whiteley. All members of the New Bohemian Society. The same society where the victim, Amelia North, made her last public appearance? Exactment. This, mon ami, is not a coincidence. Poirot continued scanning the list, finger pausing over a final name. Eloise Garnier. Eloise Garnier, he said softly. That name, I have heard it before. She was once considered Margot's protégée, no? Hastings nodded. Yes, she disappeared from the art scene rather suddenly. Some scandal about forged paintings. Ah. Poirot's eyes sparkled. Then she may be more relevant than anyone suspected. A sudden sound from below startled them, a door slamming shut, followed by hurried footsteps. Poirot raised a finger to his lips and tiptoed toward the attic stairs, Hastings close behind. They crouched at the top, ears straining. I swear I heard someone moving, a voice whispered. A woman. Nervous. Another answered, a man's voice this time, gravelly and low. You shouldn't be here, Clara. If she catches us. Poirot nodded at Hastings and descended, deliberately allowing a creak of the stair to give warning. In the parlor, a man and woman froze like deer in torchlight. The man, sharply dressed in a gray wool suit, was Alfred Chalmers. The woman was young, barely 20, with paint-stained fingers and frightened eyes. Ah, Poirot said warmly as if greeting old friends. Monsieur Chalmers, mademoiselle. You are not intruding, non. Merely helping the investigation, I presume? Chalmers recovered quickly. We were looking for something Margot left behind. A sketch. Sentimental value. And what sentimental value might be assigned to a list of names with your own at the top, monsieur? Chalmers stiffened. Clara looked as though she might cry. She didn't mean to hurt anyone, the girl blurted suddenly. It was supposed to be a game. That's all it ever was. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A game? Clara nodded, wringing her hands. The cookbook, the one everyone talks about, wasn't just recipes. It was part of a treasure hunt. Hidden messages in the index. Margot created it, but others joined in. Some took it too seriously. Hastings looked baffled. Are you saying someone killed Amelia North over a puzzle in a cookbook? Not just a puzzle, said Chalmers at last. There were secrets hidden inside. Real ones. Margot used her recipes to encode gossip, rumors, even blackmail. People paid her to bury things, and to dig others up. And when Amelia found something she wasn't meant to? Poirot asked gently. She confronted Margot, Clara whispered. At the studio. That's why they argued that night. And what happened after the confrontation? Poirot pressed. Where did Margot go? Neither answered. Poirot walked slowly to the fireplace mantel and lifted a framed photograph of Margot with a younger woman, Eloise Garnier. He turned it around. Scrawled on the back in blue ink were the words, "She knows too much. Get rid of the page before it's too late." He replaced the frame, then turned to the two intruders. I believe, Amias Amos, we have reached the point where games are no longer amusing. I suggest you remain available for further questioning. Chalmers hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Once they were gone, Hastings sighed. So it was more than a cookbook after all. What now? Poirot moved to the small reading table by the window. He lifted the book Amelia had been clutching before her death, A Study of Shadows, Volume I, and opened to the index. Now, mon ami, he said, tapping a series of seemingly random page numbers. We follow the breadcrumbs. And we prepare to meet the shadow that has been lurking in plain sight. Chapter 12, The Cipher in the Photograph. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains as Poirot stood before the mantelpiece in the library of the Blakeney estate, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The photograph of Jonathan and Cassandra, once merely a sentimental artifact on the sideboard, now occupied the center of the table, bathed in a circle of light. Hastings watched as his friend scrutinized it for the fourth time in silence. Mon ami, Poirot finally spoke, tell me, what do you see here? A young couple. Happy it seems. Taken a few years ago. Standing before a fountain, Hastings replied cautiously. It's pleasant. Poirot gave a slight nod. Oui. Pleasant. But consider not what is obvious. Consider what is hidden in plain sight. He gestured to a peculiar detail, a small silver locket barely visible beneath Cassandra's blouse collar, peeking out like a whisper. Poirot had noticed it hours ago, but only now did he dare entertain its significance. You remember, Hastings, the torn page we found tucked inside the cookbook? Poirot asked. The one with the strange code? Numbers and symbols jumbled as though written in haste. Of course. I assumed it was a cipher of some sort. Indeed. And now I am convinced that the key to deciphering it lies in this locket. Look again, notice anything? Hastings peered closer. It has an engraving. Tiny, but I think it's the letter V. Or perhaps a Roman numeral? Ah. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You see, the locket bears an initial note not of her name, but of her mother's maiden name, Vereze. A name whispered by the lawyer in the sealed will. They had not yet mentioned the codicil, only revealed the original will to the family. Poirot had asked the solicitor to withhold the amended copy until he gave the word. And now he had a strong suspicion as to why. He paced slowly. Jonathan Blakeney, I now believe, discovered something hidden within his wife's possessions. Perhaps her journal. Perhaps that very locket. Something that unraveled the story of not just her affair, but of something far older. A betrayal that led to her death and ultimately to his own. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mrs. Danbury appeared in the doorway, pale and flustered. Monsieur Poirot, she said, you asked me to notify you if anyone visited Cassandra's old room. Just now Miss Rachel was there. She was holding a small box, wrapped in silk. Poirot and Hastings exchanged glances. 1,000 thanks, madam, Poirot said, slipping past her with purpose. They found Rachel in the garden, seated beneath the willow tree, the box in her lap. She did not look up as they approached. I assume you know, she said quietly. Poirot folded his hands. I do not yet know everything, mademoiselle. But I believe you might be able to assist me. Rachel opened the box. Inside was the locket from the photograph, and a small folded sheet of paper, crisp, faded, and inked with the same hand as the torn cipher. It's hers, she said. My mother's. I found it tucked into a false bottom of her jewelry drawer after the funeral. I never told father. I didn't know what to make of it. Poirot lifted the paper with delicate fingers. The symbols danced before his eyes. But now the context was clearer. The cipher was a substitution, a map of dates and letters cross-referenced with pages in the cookbook. Recipes, he now understood, marked with initials and cryptic annotations. It is not merely a cookbook, Poirot murmured, but a diary, encoded in custards and casseroles. Rachel gave a half-laugh, half-sob. She was clever like that. She hid everything in plain sight. Secrets disguised as ordinary things. Like our family. Poirot turned to Hastings. And now we must reconstruct the trail. Each recipe marked by Cassandra becomes a chapter. Each dish a moment she feared, or perhaps hoped, someone would one day uncover. And who killed her? Rachel asked. Her voice was soft but sharp like a blade. Poirot looked away for a long moment. That, mademoiselle, is what I intend to discover tonight. They returned to the library where Poirot laid out the cipher beside the cookbook, the photograph and Cassandra's locket. Piece by piece he began to thread the tale. The missing chapter is almost complete, Hastings, he said, eyes narrow with resolve. But one final act remains. He straightened, dusting invisible lint from his sleeve. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we gather everyone in the drawing room. The time has come to reveal the full truth." And as the candle flames flickered against the polished glass, Poirot's little gray cells worked at their highest intensity. Each symbol, each tear-stained page, each whispered lie circling into one precise deduction. Chapter 13. The Shadow on the Stairwell. The night had thickened into a silken silence, broken only by the distant coo of an owl and the slow groan of the old house settling into its bones. Hastings followed Poirot down the narrow stairwell, the one near the east wing, long forgotten by the household staff but suspiciously dustless when Poirot had inspected it that afternoon. Poirot moved carefully, holding a small electric lantern in one hand and a folded note in the other. It was the anonymous message delivered that evening: "Return to the east stairwell before midnight. The truth breathes there." "We could be walking into a trap," Hastings muttered, his voice low. "Mais non," Poirot said calmly, pausing to inspect the wallpaper. "A trap perhaps, but one that invites rather than ambushes. A truth does not hide unless someone fears it." The stairwell's faded red carpet muffled their steps. Portraits lined the walls, ancestral figures staring down in eerie judgment, their eyes seeming to shift with every flicker of light. Poirot stopped before a peculiar painting, an unknown woman not listed in the family records. Her face was blurred by time, her expression unreadable. Below the frame, a small iron hook protruded from the wall. Poirot leaned closer. "This hook is too recent. The rust does not match the age of the other fixtures." He tugged at it gently, then with more force. A soft click echoed through the stairwell, and the wall panel beneath the painting creaked open half an inch. "A hidden door," Hastings breathed. With some effort they pushed the panel aside. A narrow stone passage extended into darkness, choked with cobwebs and the scent of mildew. "Do you suppose this leads to the cellar?" Hastings asked, already bracing himself. Poirot nodded. "More likely, it connects to an escape route. But we follow it, Hastings. For the shadows no longer lie silent." They entered, the air growing colder. The passage bent to the right, then dipped into a staircase carved directly into stone. Poirot's lantern cast long shadows ahead of them, and at the bottom they found a wooden door. Hastings reached for the handle. "Wait," Poirot said, pointing. Scratched into the wood, almost invisible, was a word: "Pardon." Beneath it, a date: April 4th, 1918. "That's during the war," Hastings whispered. Poirot gently pushed the door open. A tiny room lay within, furnished with only a chair and a broken writing desk. The walls were covered in yellowed newspapers, pinned there with careful precision. In the corner, a bundle of cloth sat under an old army coat. Poirot stepped closer, then crouched. Underneath the coat was a journal, water-damaged but mostly intact. On its cover, Edgar Rivenhall. Hastings stared. "That's the eldest son. He died in the war." Poirot flipped the journal open. The first page was dated 2 weeks after Edgar's supposed death. Hastings leaned over, reading the inked lines. "The war did not kill me. I let them think it did. There are things I could not face. Things my father, God forgive him, demanded I bury. But I buried myself instead." Poirot's face was grave. "Mon ami, we are not merely chasing a murder. We are chasing ghosts of this family's truth." As they turned the pages, names and events came to light. An affair between Edgar and a woman named Elsie, believed to be the maid dismissed under mysterious circumstances. Mentions of a pregnancy. And later of blackmail. "Elsie," Hastings whispered. "The girl whose name has come up again and again." Poirot nodded. "The same Elsie whose scarf was found in the study. The same Elsie who vanished without a trace after a stormy night nearly 30 years ago." They read in silence. The last page bore only one line: "If she is gone, then I am the one who killed her, though not with my hands." Poirot rose to his feet slowly. "This is not the end. It is the middle." They left the hidden chamber quietly and returned to the surface, exiting through the same stairwell. Poirot looked back once more before the panel clicked shut behind them. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we speak to Lady Rivenhall again. She has lied to protect something. Or someone. And what if she continues to lie?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled sadly. "Then we dig deeper still until even the lies are forced to become truth." Chapter 14. The Uninvited Witness. The sound of the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway was the only thing that filled the silence once the officers had taken Mrs. Thorne to the parlor for questioning. Poirot stood near the desk in the study, one hand clasped behind his back, the other tapping lightly against his chin. Hastings sat in the armchair opposite, his brow furrowed. "She's lying, isn't she?" Hastings said quietly. "That bit about the necklace falling, it's absurd." Poirot gave a small nod. "It lack finesse, mon ami. And the truth, it leaves behind fingerprints even when the guilty believe it hidden." Before Hastings could respond, a soft knock came at the doorway. Both men turned as a housemaid, young, pale and fidgeting, stepped inside. "Excuse me, sir," she said, wringing her hands in front of her apron. I wasn't sure if I should speak, but I heard you asking about that night, the night Mr. Edward died." Poirot gestured warmly. "Comme, mademoiselle. There is no need to fear. Speak freely." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "My name's Lillian. I help Mrs. Thorne with the laundry and linens. I wasn't supposed to be there that evening, but she asked me to come late. Said the household needed extra hands for the dinner party, even though it was just Mr. Edward and her." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Please continue." "Well?" She hesitated, eyes darting around nervously. "I brought up fresh sheets for the guest room. That's when I heard raised voices in the study. Mr. Edward was shouting and Mrs. Thorne was crying. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, I swear, but it was hard not to." Hastings leaned forward. "What were they arguing about?" The girl looked down at her hands. "Money. And a woman. Mr. Edward accused her of hiding something. He said she was lying to protect someone else. And then he shouted something about the will." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The will?" "Yes, sir. He said, if you think this will save him, you're mistaken. The new will goes into effect tomorrow, and neither of you will see a cent." The room went still. Poirot asked gently, "Did you hear anything after that?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I hurried back down. I didn't want to get in trouble. But then, the next morning he was found dead and Mrs. Thorne never mentioned I was in the house. I thought it was strange that she kept my visit quiet." Poirot gave a small, appreciative nod. "You did well to come forward now, mademoiselle." She turned to leave, but Hastings caught her. "One more thing. Did you ever see the necklace Mrs. Thorne claimed to have dropped? The one they were supposedly looking for when Edward died?" Lillian blinked. "No, sir. She was wearing it that evening. I remember because it caught the candlelight when she came downstairs. I thought it was odd she'd wear something so fancy when it was just him and her." Poirot turned away slowly, walking to the window, arms now folded. Outside, the estate grounds stretched out, darkened by the approaching dusk. "The lies are beginning to fray, Hastings," he said softly. "Madame Thorne knew about the will. She feared what it meant. And now we have proof she was not alone in her concerns." Hastings stood. "You mean, save him? She was protecting someone else?" Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "Oui. And I believe we are close to discovering who." At that moment, footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy and hurried. Inspector Farrow burst in, breathless. "We just searched the stables again. Behind a loose floorboard in the old feed room, we found this." He held up a sealed envelope. Poirot took it delicately and read the outside. Hastings leaned in. "What does it say?" Poirot read aloud, "To be delivered to my solicitor in the event of my death. Edward Thorne." The chapter ended not with a gasp, but with silence, as though the very air in the room had thickened with consequence. Poirot's fingers tightened slightly on the envelope as he looked up, gaze distant. "The dead, Hastings," he murmured, "they do not lie. But the living, they weave curtains of deceit, forgetting that truth is a light that always finds a seam." Chapter 15, The Widow's Map. The rain had turned into a whispering mist as Detective Blaze and Margaret stepped back inside the widow's house, their boots damp from the wet cobblestones. The house seemed even quieter now, as though it too held its breath, waiting for a revelation. Blaze took a slow turn through the front hall, eyes scanning every frame, every uneven board of the wooden floor. Margaret followed silently, clutching the edge of her coat. "She's hiding something, isn't she?" Blaze nodded without looking back. "She is. And I suspect it's buried deeper than a secret affair." He led them back to the small drawing room. It still smelled faintly of dried roses and cold tea. Blaze stood before the old wooden bookshelf, his fingers brushing across the spines. "Notice anything peculiar?" he murmured. Margaret tilted her head. "Books on travel, gardening, poetry. Nothing strange." "Exactly," he replied. "Nothing personal. No photo albums. No journals. No signs of a life lived with someone for 30 years. He tugged lightly on the shelf and smiled as it shifted, just a hair. "Help me," he said, and the two of them began to pull. With a low groan, the bookshelf slid aside, revealing a small alcove carved into the wall. Inside sat a narrow table, draped in dust and cobwebs. On it lay a bundle wrapped in faded velvet cloth. Blaze reached out and slowly unwrapped it. A yellowed parchment unfolded in his hands. A map. Hand-drawn, ink fading in places, but clearly outlining a series of buildings. At the top was scrawled a name: Whitestone Holdings, Storage Facility B. Margaret leaned over. That name again. Whitestone. Blaze narrowed his eyes. She said she didn't know what Edward was working on. But this proves otherwise. Behind the map was a thin notebook. Inside, in sharp, tight handwriting, were Edward's entries. March 3rd, met with Dr. Lang. Storage secured. Widow not to know. April 5th, Lang insisted on bringing in Harris. Something about protective rights. Doesn't sit well. May 10th, she's asking questions. Burn the second ledger. Keep the original with the map. Blaze tapped the final line. Second ledger. That must be what was found in his study, the decoy. Margaret's voice lowered. Which means she knew where the original was. She's kept this map hidden for months, Blaze muttered. Not out of sentiment. Out of fear. Or guilt. They heard the door creak behind them. Mrs. Harrow stood there, pale as the moon, her eyes darting between the map and the detective. I warned him, she said, her voice hoarse. Told him to leave it alone. They don't like anyone asking questions. Who are they? Blaze asked gently. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked slowly into the room and sat down, hands trembling. I found the map after he died. I knew it was important, but I didn't know who to trust. Edward kept secrets. He thought he could protect us by lying. But those men, Lang, Harris, they're dangerous. Why keep it hidden then? Blaze asked. Because if I came forward, they'd know I had it. I've had the same car parked down the street for 2 weeks. And just yesterday, she looked down. Someone left a white rose on my doorstep. Margaret froze. That's what was left on Edward's grave. Blaze folded the map carefully. You need to stay somewhere safe tonight. We'll take this from here. Mrs. Harrow nodded, visibly relieved. You're going to Whitestone? We are, Blaze confirmed. And if this map is right, we'll find what Edward died protecting. As they left the house, the night felt colder. The fog thickened around them, curling through the alleyways like fingers reaching from the unknown. Blaze tucked the map inside his coat, his jaw tight with purpose. This ends at Whitestone, he said softly. Margaret nodded. And begins there too. They stepped into the mist, unaware of the figure watching from across the street, unmoving, breath held, and holding a white rose. Chapter 16. The Letter in the Chimney. The evening shadows crept along the walls of the Danvers estate as Poirot and Hastings sat in the once grand drawing room, its silence broken only by the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock. Poirot had barely touched his tea. His gaze, distant and sharp, hovered somewhere between thought and memory. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Poirot, you've been in that same pose for nearly half an hour. Are we waiting for something? Poirot finally stirred, adjusting his cuffs. Mais oui, mon ami. We are waiting for the past to speak. And I believe it will, through ashes if necessary. Just then Mrs. Duxbury entered with a cautious knock. Mr. Poirot, the gardener says he found something strange while clearing the old chimney in the west wing. Poirot stood swiftly. Ah, the west wing. Hastings, let us investigate. The west wing of the estate was in disuse, cobwebbed and draughty, thick with the smell of old stone and smoke. The gardener, a wiry man with soot-stained hands, pointed toward the hearth. It fell from up there, he said, handing Poirot a scorched, brittle envelope. Wrapped in cloth, like someone didn't want it to burn completely. Poirot opened it carefully, revealing a letter sealed with wax that had long since melted into a dark blot. The paper crackled in his hands as he unfolded it. What does it say? Hastings asked, leaning in. Poirot read aloud. To whom it may concern, if I am dead and this is found, know this. I did not fall by accident. The truth lies with those closest to me. Trust no one, especially the one who mourns the loudest. It was signed Rosalind. A cold silence followed. Poirot folded the letter with reverence. This confirms what I suspected. Mademoiselle Rosalind knew her end approached, and she tried to leave a trace behind. But someone, perhaps the killer, tried to destroy it. Hastings frowned. The one who mourns the loudest. That could be anyone. Lydia fainted twice at the funeral, and Harold all but collapsed during his speech. Poirot's brow furrowed. Oui, but consider who benefited. Harold gained control of the estate. Lydia returned from exile with full access to Rosalind's fortune. And then there is Mr. Lavington, always present, always helpful. He turned to the gardener. Tell me, mon brave, when did you last clean this chimney? The man scratched his head. Couldn't say exactly. It's been blocked for years. But the cloth and letter weren't covered in much soot, like they were placed not long ago. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then it is no accident we have discovered it only now. Back in the main house, Poirot gathered the family in the salon. Lydia, Harold, Mr. Lavington, and Mrs. Duxbury sat before him, expressions ranging from bored to anxious. I have found a message, Poirot began, hidden where only someone desperate or clever would think to look. A letter from Rosalind herself, written before her death. Lydia's face went pale. Harold's fists tightened on the armrests. Poirot continued, she feared for her life. She did not trust those around her. And now, with this letter, we have proof that she suspected someone would kill her. What nonsense! Harold blurted. If she thought someone was after her, why didn't she come to the police? Because, monsieur, Poirot said calmly, she did not know whom to trust, perhaps not even the police. Perhaps especially not them, if they were under the influence of someone in this room. Lavington stood, adjusting his tie. Are you accusing us all, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot gave a small nod. I am merely stating that each of you had motive, means, and opportunity. And that one among you tried to silence Rosalind's last voice. Show us the letter, Lydia demanded. Poirot shook his head. In time, madam. First, I must verify its origin, and confirm its age. There are ways to determine if the ink and parchment match the time of her death. He left the room with Hastings following closely. As they ascended the stairs, Hastings asked, Do you really need to test it, Poirot? No, mon ami, Poirot said, smiling slightly. I already know it is genuine. But by delaying its contents, I create pressure. The guilty mind will not rest easy. That night, the house creaked with secrets. Poirot waited patiently. He knew, tomorrow someone would act. Whether to retrieve the letter, discredit it, or silence another witness, they would act. And Poirot would be ready. Chapter 17. Shadows upon the walls. The evening had drawn its heavy veil over the manor by the time Poirot and Hastings were once again seated in the drawing-room, joined by Lady Ravenshire, her son Lionel, and a visibly shaken Mr. Pembroke. The fire crackled in the grate, casting long shadows that flickered across the walls, as if the room itself were straining to listen to the truth about to be unearthed. Poirot, now leaning slightly forward in his chair, steepled his fingers with a calm precision. His eyes flicked toward each guest, pausing with quiet meaning. Mess Amos, we are nearing the denouement. But before I draw the final curtain, there remain threads, frayed, knotted, and hidden, that we must unravel together. Lionel Ravenshire, arms folded, scoffed lightly. You've said that before, Monsieur Poirot. Yet here we still sit. What more is there to uncover? Patience, monsieur, Poirot replied gently. The truth does not shout, it whispers. And we must lean close to hear it. He turned to Lady Ravenshire. Madam, you spoke earlier of your husband's obsession with the Ravenshire bloodline, how he sought to preserve it, even purify it. Yet I believe you held back something. Something connected not to your husband's pride, but to your own fear. Lady Ravenshire's posture stiffened. Her hands clutched the edge of the armrest. I did not think it relevant. But it is. You feared your husband would discover something. A truth he had not anticipated. Her voice was brittle. Yes. He discovered that his father's mistress had borne a child, and that child, illegitimate as it was, might have a claim to the estate, should the truth come to light. A child, Hastings echoed. Who would be what, his half-sibling? Indeed, Poirot nodded. And more importantly, someone whose existence threatened the very legacy Lord Ravenshire had spent a lifetime protecting. The child was sent away hidden, never acknowledged. But Lord Ravenshire, in his obsession, began to dig. And in doing so, he unearthed more than he bargained for. Mr. Pembroke, pale, looked as though the blood had drained from his face. That cannot be. But it is, monsieur, Poirot said softly. You were not merely the estate manager's son, were you? Pembroke's lips trembled, and for a moment, silence engulfed the room. I was told nothing, he whispered. Only that my mother worked in the house and I was taken away when I was just a baby. I returned as a servant, never knowing. Poirot gave a solemn nod. Lord Ravenshire discovered the truth. And when he confronted you, you were devastated. He did not treat you as kin. He saw only a stain on his bloodline. Pembroke looked away. He threatened to cut off everything, To have me dismissed, exiled, ruined? But I swear I didn't kill him. Poirot stood now, slowly pacing the room. Non, I believe you. Because you were not the only one with a secret. Someone else knew of your connection and feared that Lord Ravenshire might do something irrevocable. He paused before Lionel. You knew as well. Je ne les fais d'argent. That's absurd. No, monsieur. You found a letter. In your father's study. It was unsigned, but it hinted at the affair. You feared your inheritance, your title, everything was at risk. You confronted your father, and he laughed at your indignation. He called you weak. Lionel rose from his chair, anger blazing in his eyes. He did laugh. He always laughed at me. My whole life I was a disappointment to him. I couldn't shoot, couldn't hunt, couldn't carry on the bloody name like a soldier. But I didn't kill him. I didn't. Poirot turned now to Hastings, voice low. Do you remember, mon ami, the chessboard in Lord Ravenshire's study? The Black Queen missing? Yes, Hastings nodded. It struck me as odd. Poirot smiled faintly. It was meant to. Because the missing piece was not lost, it was taken. And planted. He strode to the side table and retrieved the Black Queen from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. Found in the garden beneath the broken sundial. A place only one person visited that morning. He turned to the final figure in the room, Clara, the maid who stood in the corner, unnoticed until now. No one questioned you, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. But I must. Clara's face turned white. I didn't mean to. Poirot raised a hand. No. I do not think you killed Lord Ravenshire either. But I believe you saw something. Something dangerous. I saw Lionel, she murmured. In the corridor. Late at night. He had blood on his hands. Lionel stepped forward, trembling. It wasn't his blood. I punched the mirror in my room after the argument. That's all. You think I murdered him, but I didn't. Poirot looked at each of them in turn, eyes narrowing. No, he said finally. You did not. And with that he moved toward the door. But the one who did is close. Very close. He paused, hand on the handle. And tomorrow, Mes Amos. I shall name them. With a final glance at Hastings, Poirot added, let us hope the night is long enough for truths to sleep, and short enough for justice to rise. Chapter 18. The Thread Unraveled. Detective Blaze stood before the gathered crowd in the grand parlor of the Blackmore estate. The storm outside had passed, but a thick, expectant silence had taken its place inside. Every key player was present. Evelyn with her eyes narrowed, Bernard clutching a glass with trembling fingers, Mrs. Lyle pale and stiff, and Thomas hunched in the corner with his head low. Even Judge Harrow had returned, drawn in by the detective's insistence that the final truth would be revealed tonight. Blaze took a breath and began, his voice calm but edged with finality. From the beginning, this case was not about love or betrayal, it was about control, about old secrets buried in elegant graves. But one detail refused to stay buried, the widow's text messages. The ones she never sent. The ones that were deleted from her phone after her death. Gasps echoed through the room. Yes, Blaze continued, they were wiped remotely after the fact. Not by a stranger, but someone with access to her cloud credentials. Someone who knew where she kept her backup data. That person, ladies and gentlemen, is sitting among us. He turned toward Bernard. Mr. Blackmore, your business holdings are in trouble. You've built your empire on the illusion of prestige, and losing control of Evelyn's fortune would mean ruin. Bernard stood. That's a lie. I loved her. Loved her enough to know about her affair with Judge Harrow? Blaze asked quietly. The judge stiffened. Bernard's face blanched. Blaze didn't let the silence linger. Yes, Evelyn and the judge were involved. But not in the way you think. She was blackmailing him. Not for money but for power. She had dirt on several of his rulings. She wanted leverage. And she stored everything in a hidden file on her phone. Thomas's voice broke in. That's why she was always so paranoid, she told me once. She said if anything ever happened to her, the truth would still come out. Blaze nodded. And it almost did, if not for the staged suicide. But the messages were wiped too late. One of them survived in a preview notification, and that fragment, I know who it is. Tell Blaze, was enough to crack the illusion. Evelyn stood, voice shaking. So who killed her, Blaze? Bernard. Blaze looked at her, then slowly shook his head. No. He covered it up. He deleted the text. But the actual murderer is someone much more desperate. He turned to Mrs. Lyle. You knew everything, didn't you? You were Evelyn's confidant. You had access to her room, her medication, her tea. Mrs. Lyle gasped. No, how dare you? You loved her like a daughter and you thought she was ruining herself. You believed taking her life would be an act of mercy. You even tried to make it look poetic, roses, lace, the perfectly framed note. But you underestimated one thing. He stepped forward. You underestimated Evelyn's final act. She hid a tiny recording device in the drawer. It didn't capture her killer's face, but it did capture a voice. Yours. You whispered to her as she slipped away. Mrs. Lyle sank into a chair, eyes wide with grief. I didn't mean to, she was spiraling. I just wanted to stop the chaos. A sob rippled from the corner. Judge Harrow stood, his own face twisted with shame. And I destroyed evidence because I was afraid it would come back to me. I thought the scandal would end me. It nearly did. Blaze nodded solemnly. There's guilt enough for all of you. But only one committed the ultimate act. Mrs. Lyle, you will be taken into custody. The room sat in stunned silence. Outside, dawn had begun to break, streaking the sky with pale lavender and gray. Later, as Blaze stood alone on the terrace, Nora joined him quietly. It's over? She asked. For now, Blaze said, his eyes distant. But stories like this never really end. They linger. In the lies we tell. In the secrets we bury. Nora touched his arm. And in the detectives who dig them up. He gave a faint smile. Until the next clue whispers. The wind picked up, scattering the last rose petals Evelyn once loved. And with them, the ghosts of secrets are no longer silent.